The babyface mask returned. Same grin, same dead eyes. But when it hit the floor the second time, the face underneath belonged to someone who had been sitting in the background of nearly every scene, and nobody gave him a second thought. Happy Death Day to you, trapped Tree Gelbman inside the loop again. New dimension, new rules, and a new killer wearing the exact same mask. The first film taught audiences to hunt for jealousy, for personal betrayal. So when the babyface showed up again, everyone started profiling. Ex-boyfriends, rivals, anyone with a grudge. They were looking for emotion. The killer had none. It was Gregory, Ryan's lab partner. A guy most viewers couldn't even name. He wasn't heartbroken. He wasn't obsessed. He was protecting a research project. His academic future. That was the entire motive. The mask slipped off, and underneath was something audiences rarely see in horror. Not fury, not madness, but cold professional self-interest. A man who calculated that murder was a smaller problem than a ruined thesis. It should have felt anticlimactic. Instead, it felt deeply unsettling. Because you can prepare yourself for a killer who hates you. You can never prepare for one who simply doesn't care. Gregory killed to protect his career. The next killer spent an entire summer making 4 teenagers believe they'd already gotten away with destroying his life. A gutted fish on the back seat. A handwritten note with 5 words that made their blood freeze. I know what you did last summer let its teenagers believe they had buried their crime at the bottom of the ocean. 1 year of silence. 1 year of convincing themselves that the man they hit with their car was gone forever. Then the hook appeared. A figure in a rain slicker. Methodical, patient, relentless. The genius of Ben Willis wasn't his disguise, it was his timing. He waited. Let them graduate. Let them smile. Let them feel safe. And then he peeled that safety away. 1 dead fish. 1 slashed tire. 1 murdered friend at a time. When the slicker was finally torn back and his face was revealed, alive, scarred, breathing, the horror wasn't that he survived. The horror was reflected. 4 kids stared at the walking consequence of the night they chose to stay silent. They didn't create a villain, they created a mirror, and the face in it was their own guilt wearing someone else's skin. Those teenagers ran from the man they tried to bury. But the people in the next film didn't even realize the game had already ended before they woke up. A room full of strangers, nerve gas in the air, a ticking clock. Saw 2 locked 8 people inside a house and let Detective Eric Matthews watch them die on a wall of monitors, his own son Daniel among them. Every second, Eric unraveled. He begged. He threatened. He finally snapped Jigsaw's wrist and forced him to reveal the house's location. He sprinted through the door, weapon drawn, ready to save his son. The house was empty. Every monitor, every scream, every drop of blood, all pre-recorded. The events happened hours ago. Daniel was already sealed inside a safe, the only truly safe place in the building, and all Eric ever had to do was wait. He couldn't. And that impatience walked him directly into the real trap. A bathroom door slammed shut behind him, and standing on the other side was Amanda Young. Not the trembling survivor from the first film, not the broken woman who barely escaped the reverse bear trap. Amanda, calm and certain, looked at Eric through the closing door, and the audience realized she had never been a victim. She was Jigsaw's apprentice. Her survival story, her trauma, her tears, all of it performed. The mask Amanda wore was never physical. It was the greatest acting role in horror history, and the audience bought every second of it. Amanda hid behind trauma. The next killer hid behind something even more sacred. A legacy that wasn't his to claim. The hockey mask. The machete. The body count climbing at a halfway house near Crystal Lake. Every frame of Friday the 13th Part 5 screamed one name, Jason Voorhees. Audiences settled in. They knew exactly who was doing the killing. They'd seen this movie before. Literally. Then the mask was ripped off. And behind it was Roy Burns, a paramedic. A man so minor that most viewers had already forgotten the only scene that mattered. His son Joey being hacked to death by a fellow patient in the first 15 minutes. That scene lasted seconds. It felt like background noise. It was the entire motive. Roy didn't put on Jason's mask because he admired a killer. He put it on because he understood something primal. The mask itself was the weapon. Jason's face didn't terrify Crystal Lake. The mask did, and anyone could wear it. Audiences hated this reveal. They felt robbed. They wanted Jason and received an imposter. But decades later, the anger faded and a far more uncomfortable truth settled in. The mask didn't need Jason. It never did. Evil wasn't a person. It was a costume anyone could put on. And Roy Burns proved that the thing audiences worshipped as an icon was really just a piece of plastic that turned grief into a massacre. Roy stole a dead man's face. The next killer didn't bother stealing anything. He simply took his own mask off and dared his victim to survive knowing who he was. Silence. Complete, total silence. That's what Maddie Young lived inside every day. A deaf writer, alone in the woods. And when a stranger in a white crossbow appeared outside her glass door, the film played every horror beat the audience expected. The faceless stalker, the vulnerable woman, the slow creep of dread. Then he pulled off his own mask, calmly, deliberately, while Maddie watched. No dramatic reveal, no third act twist. He stood at her window, fully exposed, and let her memorize every detail of his face. Hush broke the only rule audiences thought was sacred, that the killer's identity is the final secret. This man had no secret. He had no name the film cared to give. No grudge, no history with Maddie. He removed his mask because her isolation guaranteed it didn't matter. She couldn't call for help. She couldn't scream. The unmasking wasn't a reveal. It was a threat. He was telling her, I don't need to hide from you. You're already gone. And that confidence, that casual certainty that he was untouchable, turned a faceless slasher into something far worse. A man who wanted his victim to see exactly who was going to kill her, and know that seeing changed nothing. That killer showed his face because isolation made him untouchable. But what happens when the face behind horror's most iconic mask belongs to a 6-year-old boy standing in his own front yard? The opening of Halloween is a single unbroken shot. The camera moves through a house. A kitchen knife is picked up. A teenage girl is stabbed to death. The camera never cuts. The breathing behind the mask is heavy, rhythmic, animal. Then the front door opens. Two parents pull the mask off, and the camera tilts down. A boy, blonde hair, a clown costume. Michael Myers, 6 years old, holding a bloody knife, staring at nothing. Not crying, not confused, not afraid, just empty. John Carpenter didn't reveal a monster in that moment. He revealed the absence of one. There was no demon, no possession, no supernatural explanation. Just a child who murdered his sister and stood in the yard afterward, as if waiting for someone to tell him what to do next. That single image, a small boy in a clown suit, blade at his side, eyes that registered absolutely nothing, became the foundation of an entire franchise, because audiences could accept a masked, shape-stalking babysitters. What they couldn't accept, what still disturbs people nearly 50 years later, is that the shape started as a child. And no one ever found out why. Michael Myers had no explanation. The next killer didn't need one, because his mask told the audience everything they needed to know about what kind of monster he really was. Leatherface didn't hide behind rubber. He didn't hide behind plastic. When the camera finally held steady on his face in the 2003 Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the audience realized what they were looking at. Human skin, stitched, dried, pulled tight over a disfigured skull, like a quilt sewn from the dead. This wasn't a disguise, it was an identity. Leatherface had no face of his own. Every mask was constructed from a previous victim, their features stretched into his, their humanity reduced to leather and thread. Erin, the final girl, saw it clearly in the basement. Not a man, not even a monster in the traditional sense. A hollow thing that could only exist by wearing other people. The unmasking didn't peel back a layer. It added one, because underneath the skin mask was another ruin. And underneath that was nothing at all. You weren't running from a killer. You were running from an emptiness that wanted to put you on. Leatherface built himself from the dead. The next killer built himself from something even more twisted. The town's own blind faith. A pilgrim with a cleaver. A buckled hat splattered in blood. Thanksgiving turned an American holiday into a crime scene, and the John Carver costume was so absurd that audiences almost laughed. Killer dressed as a historical figure, murdering people with carving knives and turkey-themed execution methods. It felt like a joke. It wasn't. Behind the pilgrim mask stood Sheriff Eric Newland, the man running the investigation, the man holding press conferences, reassuring the public, promising justice. Every lead he chased was one he manufactured. Every dead end was by design. He stood in front of cameras asking for tips on a killer whose face he saw in the mirror every morning. The John Carver costume wasn't just a disguise, it was a confession hidden in plain sight. A pilgrim feasts on what the land provides. And Sheriff Newland feasted on his town's trust, their obedience, their desperate need to believe the man in charge was protecting them. The costume everyone dismissed as ridiculous turned out to be the most honest thing in the entire film. The sheriff used authority as camouflage. The next reveal proved that the most dangerous disguise in horror history wasn't a mask at all. It was a friendship. Scream told audiences exactly how horror movies work. The rules, the patterns, the tropes. It handed viewers the playbook and dared them to solve the mystery in real time. Billy Loomis was the obvious suspect. So obvious he couldn't possibly be the killer. Then he got stabbed. Cleared. Audiences relaxed. Stu Macher was the loud, goofy best friend. The guy who threw the party. The last person anyone would suspect. The kitchen. The third act. Both of them standing. Both of them smiling. Both of them drenched in blood that wasn't theirs. Two killers. One mask. Shared like a shift schedule. Billy's motive was revenge. Sidney's mother destroyed his family. But Stu's motive is what still keeps audiences awake. Peer pressure. The need to belong. The desire to matter to someone, even if that someone was a murderer. When asked why he did it, Stu could barely answer. He didn't have a manifesto. He had a best friend who asked him to help kill people, and he said yes. The mask came off, and behind Ghostface wasn't darkness. It was something more recognizable. Two teenagers who convinced each other that murder was content, that killing was performance, that none of it was real until it was. The audience didn't just learn who the killer was, they learned that the most dangerous thing in the world is two people who validate each other's worst instincts. Billy and Stu killed for revenge and belonging. The next Ghostface killed for something the original duo never imagined, and it turned the final girl into the final monster. For most of Scream 4, Jill Roberts was Sidney Prescott's younger cousin, the heir to the survivor throne. She screamed on cue. She ran when she was supposed to. She bled in all the right places. The audience rooted for her the way they'd rooted for Sidney 15 years earlier. Then she stabbed Charlie Walker, her own accomplice, mid-sentence. Jill wasn't the final girl. She was the director. Every murder was choreographed, every clue was planted, and every wound on her body, the stab marks, the bruises, the shattered glass in her hair, was self-inflicted. She threw herself through a table. She dragged her own face across broken mirror. She carved the story of her survival into her own skin so the cameras would believe it. Jill didn't want revenge. She didn't want justice. She wanted fame. She wanted the book deal, the morning shows, the lifetime of being known as the girl who lived. The Unmasking didn't just reveal a killer, it revealed a generation that understood something terrifying, that in the age of content, victimhood is currency, and Jill was willing to pay for it in other people's blood. Jill manufactured herself into a survivor. The next killers didn't manufacture anything. They didn't even have a reason. Why are you doing this to us? The question hung in the air of a dark living room. Kristen McKay, bloodied and bound, stared at three masked figures who had spent the entire night circling her home, tapping on glass, vanishing into hallways, appearing behind doors. Dollface, pinup girl, the man in the sack. They never rushed. They never raged. They moved through the strangers like people with nowhere else to be. Because you were home. 4 words. That was the entire motive. And when morning came and the masks were removed, the faces underneath were young, ordinary. The kind of faces you pass in a grocery store and never remember. No scars, no history, no manifesto pinned to the wall. Just 3 people who chose a house the way you'd choose a lane in traffic. Randomly, without thought, without anything that could be called a reason. The Unmasking gave audiences nothing to hold. No psychology to decode, no trauma to trace. Just the blunt, horrible realization that the only thing separating the killers from anyone else was a decision made on a dark road for no reason at all. People checked their locks for weeks. Not because the movie was gory, because the movie was possible. The strangers killed without purpose. But the next Unmasking revealed something that operated on a far older principle. That some rules were never meant to be broken, and something ancient enforces them. He sat on the steps. He appeared in the background of someone else's scene. He walked through frame after frame of Trick or Treat, a small figure in orange footy pajamas and a burlap sack. And no one in the audience understood what they were looking at. 4 stories wove through one Halloween night. A principal poisoning children, a group of teenagers pranking each other at a flooded quarry, a young woman hiding a monstrous secret, a bitter old man who refused to celebrate the holiday. And Sam was in all of them, watching, counting, keeping score. When someone finally tore the burlap sack from his head, the face underneath wasn't human, wasn't animal. A cracked, pumpkin-like skull with blackened, hollow eyes stared outward. Ancient, patient, completely without mercy. Sam wasn't a slasher. He was a judge. Every death in the film traced back to a single broken rule. Someone disrespected Halloween, blew out a candle too early, skipped the traditions, forgot the dead. And Sam collected. The unmasking didn't reveal a villain. It revealed a system. The entire night had a warden, and every horror that unfolded was a sentence being carried out. The burlap sack didn't hide a monster. It hid a deity. And the real terror wasn't Sam's face. It was the realization that every Halloween, something might be watching to see if you follow the rules. Sam enforced the old laws, but the final unmasking on this list didn't enforce anything. It simply detonated in the last 30 seconds of a film nobody was prepared for, and left an image that horror has never been able to forget. All summer long, Angela Baker barely spoke. She sat at the edges of campfire circles. She flinched when the older kids mocked her. She watched the water and said nothing. Sleepaway Camp played her as the victim. Bullied, fragile, invisible. The murders happened around her, and the camera kept her small, kept her quiet, kept her out of focus. Then the final scene. The camera finds Angela at the lake's edge. The counselors approach. They call her name. She stands, she turns, and the audience sees. Angela is Peter, her aunt. The woman who raised her after her family's death had taken her dead sister's surviving son and forced him to live as a girl. A new name, a new identity, an entire childhood constructed on a lie so complete that even the audience believed it. The murders weren't random. They were the detonation of a person who had been told every single day that who they really were did not exist. The final image is burned into horror history. Angela standing at the water, face locked in an expression that isn't quite human anymore. Mouth open, eyes wide, the truth fully exposed. No music, no jump scare, just an image held long enough to sear itself into memory. The film didn't explain, it didn't apologize, it didn't offer a lesson. It simply showed what happens when someone is hollowed out so completely that what fills the empty space is no longer a person. That frame, silent, unflinching, impossible to look away from, is why audiences still talk about Sleepaway Camp over 40 years later. Not because of the body count, not because of the gore, because the most terrifying mask in horror was never worn on the outside. It was the life someone was forced to live as. And that is why we never stop looking at the moment the mask comes off, because the face underneath always tells us something about ourselves we weren't ready to see.